We are live now.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Conversation with Sam. So, today we have a special guest with us, Mr. John B. Fullerton, who is a renowned impact investor, founder of the Capital Institute, and leading voice in regenerative economics. Together, Sam, Sir, and John will unpack the principles of regenerative economy. They will discuss about the future of capitalism and how young change makers can shape an equitable and sustainable future. So, whether you're a student, an entrepreneur, or a policy enthusiast, or just as curious as someone who just wants to know what comes next, this session promises a fresh insight and inspiration straight from the two of the most forward-thinking minds of our time. So, without wasting too much of my our time, I'll ask Mr. Sam Pitroda to introduce our guest and address our audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Premvada. Thank you, Upendra. John, welcome to this conversation.
Great to be with you, Sam.
It is good to see you again after a long time. Uh, John has been a friend for many years. Premvada told you a little bit about John, but John is a well known name in the field, has had very long, interesting, illustrious career in finance, economy. He and I connected about 15 years ago in Ireland at a castle and a monastery where we spent 3 days together, along with about 30 people. And we all came from different background, different parts of the world. And we talked about the future with focus on sustainability, inclusion, alternative, with great deal of concern for where we are headed. In 15 years, lots of things have happened. What is going on in US, India, and other parts of the world, including wars, bother many of us. Underlying all of this is economy, concern for inclusive growth, concern for sustainable growth. And these are the issues that John has been working on for a long, long time. I'm delighted that he agreed to come and talk to you. And I hope after today's experience, he would come back again. John, this is a group of about 500 to 700 young people who connect. And then offline, about maybe 4,000 or 5,000 people look at it. Every week we meet on Saturday morning, 9 o'clock Chicago time. And these people want to learn more about different things: economy, politics, science, entrepreneurship, education, health. So we take different topics and talk about issues for maybe 20, 30 minutes and then open up for a broader conversation. They all vary in background. They are all curious people. They are all interested in future because they take 1 hour of their busy schedule every Saturday morning and show up and ask a lot of questions. So we are delighted to have you today. Maybe you can enlighten us about your work, your concerns. And I'm sure during interaction, you will get to know some of these people and their concerns. But with this background, I want to welcome you, John, and especially thank you for accepting this on a very short notice. And I hope you come back again not just the, you know, one shot deal, but we would like you to have many more interactions with us. Thank you, John.
Wow, thank you, Sam, and boy, what a wonderful thing that you're hosting here. This community sounds fantastic, and I'm particularly delighted to be able to speak to a group of young people. I have three children myself that are in their late 20s, early 30s, and certainly my motivation in this work is first and foremost as an attempt to help make sense for the next generation. And I know, Sam, you share that feeling deeply. And so I can't believe it's been 15 years since our little jaunt in the Irish countryside on the along the sea. But boy, time flies, and what a world we live in now compared to what we were worried about then. So we're definitely in it. Maybe I just start by sharing a little bit of my own story, just to give some context.
Please.
As Sam mentioned, I have worked in the belly of the beast. I went to work at J.P. Morgan right out of college a long time ago, when J.P. Morgan was actually a much smaller firm with a wonderful culture and a great place to learn about global finance. And to kind of make a long story short, I did what young people are supposed to do, it seemed, and built a career and built success. And it was a fascinating time when derivatives were the technology that was reinventing the capital markets. And I was sort of a early first generation derivatives specialist, Tokyo, London, New York, the whole globalization thing. And in Iraq, I started to get restless and asking myself what I was doing with my life, what the purpose was. And so in 2001, Chase Manhattan Bank bought Morgan. It was called a merger, but it was a takeover. The culture was gone, and I chose to step away and think about what I wanted to do next. All I knew is I didn't want to keep doing what I was doing. And I decided to take the summer off. Maybe it's relevant. I'd already begun thinking about aligning capital and social purpose. In the United States, we have something called charter schools, and I had made an investment in a charter school management company. And so I was intrigued with this idea, back in the late 1990s, of aligning the capitalist system with social and environmental purposes. But I didn't know anything, now we call that impact investing. I didn't really have, I was just curious and exploring. Any rate, I left in 2001, and the first day I had a meeting back in Manhattan to think about what I was going to do next. It was a meeting with a guy who ran a different charter school than the one I had invested in, and I was thinking about starting a nonprofit charter school company. And as I was in the subway heading downtown for this meeting that was at 9:30 in the morning, at City Hall, which is sort of two stops from where my meeting was, this guy got on the subway and he announced that they'd just flown a plane into the Trade Center. And so I got out and went to the street to see what was going on, and witnessed the second plane exploding in the Trade Center. And that experience kind of shook me to the core, pushed me into a long period of introspection, and I call it deep think. And in that, I started reading books that bankers don't read, and I discovered the ecological crisis as a systemic issue. And I read a book called Limits to Growth, which essentially was a 1972 report to the Club of Rome that explained essentially that we were breaking the boundaries of the planet. Planetary boundaries wasn't a concept yet, but essentially talked about overshoot, and the takeaway was that exponential growth on a finite planet is in violation of the law of physics. And as a finance guy, I understood very well that the economy was what was driving this, and that finance is what drives the economy. So I had this sort of wake-up call moment of, it's people like me who think they're so smart that are actually driving this system collapse. And so I've been thinking about that problem ever since. And as Sam mentioned, I started a nonprofit called the Capital Institute in 2010. And again, just sort of cutting to the chase, that search has led me to an understanding of how our economics and finance have gone astray, unrelated to the ethical and moral issues that many of us would point to. It's actually the system design that is flawed at a very fundamental level. And so I believe what we're now calling the polycrisis, this interconnected set of crises that are that amplify each other and feedback to each other, that are both ecological in nature, they're economic in nature, they're financial in nature, they're social in nature, and now, of course, they're very political in nature. These are actually symptoms of a much deeper root cause. And what I believe that deeper root cause is what some people refer to as the myth of separation. This idea that we are separate from each other, we are individualist beings, not connected to each other, and that we, in aggregate, are separate from this abstraction we call nature. And it turns out that those two ideas are actually in conflict with our latest scientific understanding of reality. The 2022 Nobel Prize in Physics was awarded for this idea of universal entanglement, non-locality. And so we actually know scientifically now this idea that our ancient wisdom traditions have always talked about as oneness, that everything is connected to everything and everything is interdependent in everything. Now, why is this relevant to the economy? Well, it turns out in my study of economics, I was an economics major, but they don't teach you this in economics class. Neoclassical economics, which is the foundational framework, the theoretical framework for all modern economies, whether they're neoliberal conservative expressions of economics or the more, left-leaning democratic socialism versions of economics. All of them are built on this neoclassical framework. And I was startled to learn how the neoclassical economists, and I do courses on this. There's a longer version of this, but the gist of it is that neoclassical economics is built on a Newtonian physics foundation. And the early economists, Irving Fisher, for example, in his textbook, I discovered they literally took the mathematical formulas from Newtonian physics and assumed they applied to this system called the economy. So the thing is literally made up on a basis of assumptions that are fatally flawed. And so as a result, we treat the economy and all of the organizations that make up the economy as if they're Newtonian materialist machines to be optimized, as opposed to my belief, which is we need to understand them as complex living organisms. So the premise of regenerative economics, well, let me make one other point. Regeneration is the process that describes how life works. It's a scientific concept that explains how life works. And so think of it as the laws of living, except they're not laws like the law of gravity. They're more like principles, first principles and patterns. Things like mutualism, the idea that everything works in relationship with other things, in right relationship, symbiotic relationship. That's one of the first principles of the regenerative process. Things work in balance, the dynamic balance that we know of as being important, that actually applies to all living organisms, all living systems as well. So it's not as simple as reducing, regeneration to a list of formulas and equations the way it works in physics. But the science of there is a science of living systems, and there is a scientific consensus broadly on how living systems work. So, given that, the premise of regenerative economics is that the economy is a living system, and in the fractal nature of reality, that means not just the economy is a living system, but all of the subsystems of the economy, like the industries and the organizations, the enterprises that make up the industries, and the government organizations that make up the government roles in the economy. All of these things are complex living systems, not machines to be optimized. But in economics, one of the fundamental ideas of neoclassical economics is to maximize efficiency, to optimize the machine, and ultimately to optimize the risk adjusted return on financial capital. Because when this was all invented, financial capital was the scarce resource. So, as I said, I give an 8-week course on this. There's a lot more to be said, but the gist of it, and then I'll stop talking here. The gist of it is that we need to reimagine economics as a living system, which is part of a much bigger um, uh, awakening, because this actually applies not just to economics, it applies to health. So the whole movement toward holistic health, functional medicine, is the same expression of shifting out of this Newtonian reductionist logic worldview into a living systems worldview. The same thing has to happen with our education systems. We've created an education system to optimize the efficiency of all the specialty parts, as opposed to a holistic education system that is essentially the move toward transdisciplinary education is the same expression of this holistic approach in education. It's the same thing happening in agriculture. The move from industrial agriculture, which is the expression of this reductionist, mechanistic, optimize the machine logic in agriculture that is destroying the soil and the planet. We have to move that into what we now call regenerative agriculture, and I could go on and on and on. And so the symptoms, things like climate change and biodiversity loss and extreme inequality and the extreme physical and mental health issues that are facing humanity now, these are all actually symptoms of this much deeper interconnected crisis that we're facing. And, you guys all, you either intuit this or you understand this far better than the old folks like Sam and I, because we've grown up in a world that celebrated this reductionist, mechanistic, materialist thinking. And we've not only celebrated, but we've awarded it and promoted it as, our greatest advances and our greatest achievements. And there are a lot of advances and achievements. So the issue isn't that this reductionist break things into parts in order to understand the parts approach to things. It's not that that's wrong. It's just that it doesn't apply to complexity. It applies to things that are complicated, which are technologies and machines, but we confuse what's complicated with what's complex. And organizations, from the United Nations to your family to your own body to the entire economy, these are complex living organisms, not complicated machines. And so, just to wrap this up, maybe as an introduction, I believe we're actually living through a shift, a change in era that is comparable. The last one comparable to this was the shift from the medieval era to the modern era. And so we are essentially experiencing a new renaissance and a second scientific revolution, because everything I've just described is actually the latest scientific understanding of reality. And what blows me away is that this latest scientific understanding of reality is actually aligned with all of our ancient wisdom traditions. So in many ways, we're coming to be able to prove and validate scientifically what our ancient elders have somehow always intuited. And so the when when the Renaissance, the Italian Renaissance started, it was in the wake of a 2-year Black Death, where 1/3 of the European population died of this disease. So it was an extremely chaotic, terrifying collapse environment that happened to Europe as a result of this plague. And out of that collapse emerged the Renaissance. And out of the Renaissance emerged the scientific revolution. And so the optimistic side of this story is that this tumultuous chaos that we all experience and the drama that it has created and the uncertainty and the fear that it evokes in us is actually, I believe, part of the necessary cycle of how life works. There's growth, there's maturation, and then there's decay, and then reorganization. And we're in this reorganization phase. And so I do believe that it's going to be difficult. It's going to get more difficult, but out of it, something much more beautiful can emerge if we have the wisdom to influence that outcome in using our latest holistic understanding. And unfortunately, the forces moving in the opposite direction have become extremely powerful and extremely strong. But the positive side of that is that's actually what's creating the pressure for the reorganization. If we had just continued on in the world that Sam and I lived in when we first met, we would continue to kind of sleepwalk toward the cliff. And I believe the current chaos actually gives us a fresh opportunity to reorganize society in a way that actually has a chance of leading to a much healthier path. So I talk too much. In closing, the metaphor here is we're in the middle of a metamorphosis, a genuine metamorphosis, and the finance, what I call the finance algorithm, the way finance drives capitalist decision making in our economies, in many ways, is the immune system that's keeping the economy trapped in its unhealthy form. And so at the core of my work is to try to figure out how we degrade that immune system to allow this more beautiful possibility to emerge. And there's lots of things happening, much of it grassroots level, that is part of that story. But that is the work, and that is the experience that all of us will probably have our lives dominated by. So it's a metamorphosis, but we don't yet know what the butterfly looks like. Maybe I'll stop talking with that.
Thanks, John. Really appreciates. I appreciate your sort of overview. But what you're basically saying is that we are optimizing for wrong things.
Mm-hmm.
That we are always optimizing for profit, material, efficiency, productivity, cost reduction, but we are not optimizing for planet. So recently I've been saying a lot on the fact that we are all focused on profit and power
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to focusing on planet and people.
Mm-hmm.
The question I need to ask myself is, whatever I do, is it good for people or bad for people?
Mm-hmm.
Is it good for planet or bad for planet? I think this is the wisdom our ancestors had.
Mm-hmm.
That's how they looked at the holistic approach to everything.
Mm-hmm.
Saying whatever they do, is it good for planet? If it is not good for planet, don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
If it is not good for people, don't do it. Everyone today, whether it's in business or politics, economy, are trying to optimize on wrong things. And that's your basic message, I assume.
Yeah, yes, and even expression of optimizing. Like the reason our ancestors thought about, is this good for the planet? Is this good for people? Is because they understood that people are inextricably connected to planet. So it'd be like saying, you know, should I bite my arm off? Um, and saying, am I optimizing for my arm or am I optimizing for me? Well, if I bite my arm off, it's obviously bad for both my arm and me. So they understood this idea of oneness, this interconnectedness. There was no, in fact, in my understanding, in indigenous languages, there is no word for nature. There's a way to say my relationship to the forest or my relationship to the river, but the concept of nature as being other than me is not even in it's not even a concept. So I would go further, Sam, and say that it's not even what are we optimizing for? It's, are we creating the conditions for health, for holistic health? And what's the great basketball coach? I'm blanking on his name. He's like the most winning NBA champion coach of all time. He was the coach of the Chicago Bulls. You'll help me, Sam. Who am I thinking of?
Can't
No?
remember.
Okay. Anyway, he I have a quote of his in one of my slides where Phil Jackson is the guy I'm thinking of.
Okay.
And he was a deep holistic thinker, and he there's this quote where he says, the best we can do is create the conditions for success and then let go of the outcome. So here, the winningest athletic coach of all time is not saying, what am I optimizing for? He's saying, how do I create the conditions for success, for health, and then let go of the outcome? And that's essentially how life works, right? Life doesn't optimize. Life is constantly adapting and responding to the changing context. And so the right thing to optimize for today is going to be different than the right thing to optimize for tomorrow, because between today and tomorrow, the context has changed. And so it's this constant evolving process, which is the genius of life. And what I'm proposing is we need to learn that process first and foremost, which means, we need to re-educate. How many people who are in positions of power have even taken an ecology course? And if they've taken it, do they even understand it's relevant to their leadership position? I would suggest zero.
Yeah.
Zero. And certainly the people running Wall Street don't think about ecology other than, oh, there's this externality that we need to now think about in terms of pollution and climate change. And certainly the technology geniuses running Silicon Valley are, they're as extreme, reductionist logic. I mean, and by the way, in case, I mean, Sam understands that as one of the great technologists that I know. I mentioned this to Sam the other day. The guy who literally invented the microprocessor is saying the same thing. And he's written a book called Irreducible, if anyone's interested. And he has had his own awakening and discovered that consciousness is actually the foundation layer of reality. And so the material world that we all experience as reality is manifested out of consciousness. And he's far more sophisticated about this latest science than I am, obviously. But there are many physicists who have moved from this, reductionist understanding of trying to define reality and finding that it's limited and that it doesn't tell the whole story. And the names associated with this shift, one current contemporary one is Fritjof Capra, whose work I highly recommend. But you'll be more familiar with names like perhaps David Bohm and Albert Einstein. These people have also come to the same conclusion. So the problem is that the people, quote unquote, running the world whether in business or government positions, they don't understand this. And that's why this is a great awakening moment. Just like in the medieval era, the people running the Catholic Church didn't understand that the earth was not the center of the universe. So it's another analogy. This is a Copernican moment for humanity, where we're discovering that we're running the world on a flawed worldview. In this case, it's not that the earth is the center of the universe rather than the earth is rotating around the sun. In this case, it's that the economy is a machine that can be optimized for money. That's a earth-centric, flat earth worldview that no longer works.
Good. Okay, Priyamvada, please
Uh, Yeah.
go through.
Thank you, John. Just before I begin with audience questions, my own question: how do we make these big corporations transition into a regenerative economy? Because what we see all over the world, including India, is that the corporates, because of their greed, they are just not bothered about the nature. Like we have in India, so many of the lands, the forest being
Yeah,
just destroyed for the sake of mining.
yeah,
uh, yeah, so how do you think we can promote it, and is this possible even to because this is
yeah.
a fairly new concept? Thank you.
Well, that's the $1 million, $1 trillion question. And you know, I've been working on that question since before I met Sam.
Mm.
And if I had a good answer for it, we would be in a different place. So I think the first thing is I just need to acknowledge I don't have a plan on how to do this that is credible, but I do have a theory of change. And I don't believe, having spent not a huge amount of time trying to convince CEOs and bankers, because I found it fruitless. But I do believe that a study of complexity science helps offer a clue. And so let me share a beautiful saying from a man named Ile Prigogine, who was a Nobel Prize winning chemist and one of the early chaos theory proponents, and a deep thinker about complex adaptive systems. And he said, when a system is far from when a system is in far from equilibrium, meaning in a chaotic, um, fragile state, and I think it's safe to assume that our global economy is in a fragile state of disequilibrium. Um, he then says, small islands of coherence can shift the entire system. So that's profound for a number of reasons. One, it means that it doesn't require us convincing CEOs of big bad corporations, who are trapped in the same system, by the way. If you're the CEO of a corporation and you don't optimize risk adjusted return on capital to promote the stock price, the board of directors will quickly find a replacement for you. So I'm very hesitant. I mean, there are some bad, evil people running companies, but most people running companies are good people that are trapped in this same paradigm that I'm describing. And I don't think that the shift is likely to be led by even the most heroic corporate CEOs because of that trapped in the system problem. Even the best intention, even when they have the best intentions. And people like Paul Pullman have discovered that, even a company running a company like at the scale of Unilever can't actually do this on their own. So the getting back to the islands of coherence can shift the entire system. What that means is that, you know, you all with Sam here have created a little island of coherence. And the conversations you're having, because of this law of universal entanglement, what that means is even these conversations are going to affect the outcome in ways that none of us will ever know. But some of you are going to go off and do something that you might not have done with your life otherwise, and that's going to affect something that no one will know what the feedback loop is. That's the way complexity works. And so in my work, what I'm doing is also building an island of coherence. I've now got a global course community of 2,000 people from 81 countries. And they're now, collaborating with each other, launching new projects, launching new companies together, working on policy issues together. And so my theory of change is we need to build thousands of these islands of coherence, weave them and connect them together through, Sam and I have a beautiful connection and relationship that's 15 years old. And suddenly I get a text message from Sam saying, can you join my group? And the answer is yes before I even know what the request is. That's the islands of coherence working. And again, this is not like John's opinion. This is, Nobel chemist prize winning understanding of complexity. Complexity shifts through these islands of coherence. And maybe one last way to think about it is that another thing we learn from system science is they only change in response to pressure. So all of the chaos out there is essentially the pressure, which means that the possibility of this shifting the system is now much higher than it was before the chaos existed. So when Sam and I met, the chaos was building, but it was not ready to shift. And now the moment is there when the systems are ready to shift. But that doesn't mean they're going to shift in a positive direction. And that's where our agency comes in. The final profound point about this islands of coherence can shift the whole system is that it reminds us that we have far more agency than we believe, even though even the most powerful people in the world feel like they can't change the system. But in fact, we all have agency to change the system. We just will never see how that happened. And we have to be comfortable with that. And for me, that's actually a huge relief because I don't feel like I know how to change the system. But that's not the right question. The question is, how do we build these islands of coherence and create the conditions so that the outcome that we desire will manifest? And just as a quick reminder, going back to Fritjof Capra, he's studied living systems now his whole adult career after he moved out of the physics profession. And he defines the four principles of life as they're networked, the structure is networked. They're regenerative, that's the process. So learn what regeneration means. Third, they're creative. And so our innate creativity, and by the way, you guys may or may not know this, but Sam is a brilliant artist, just
Mhm.
doodling. He's probably got three beautiful doodles that he's made while we're having this conversation. And so remembering that we're innately
Here.
creative, there you go. I told you, is is
I knew it.
fundamentally what life is about, is fundamentally creative. And finally, Fritjof Capra says life is inherently intelligent. And so part of this is having faith in the living system process that it will adapt and respond to continue. And by the way, that's not just life on this planet. That's life in the belief that we actually inhabit a living universe. So there's 14 billion years of experience of this universe manifesting this intelligence to continue on. And so I don't think I believe in every bone of my body that we are not going to collapse into some end state, but that we are going through this turbulent time and will emerge out of it in a higher level of complexity and continue this evolutionary process.
Great. Very well said, John.
Thank you,
Really
John.
appreciate it.
Yeah, there's a question from Kiran Kumar. He's asking, how can AI contribute
Mm.
to the symbiosis of economy?
Mm. The big question. That one's actually harder than Sam's question. Um, so uh, let me try to be concise. Let's talk about something we understand better: the internet. The internet is the most profound technology, the most profound regenerative technology I can think of. Why do I say that? Because one of the first principles of regeneration is, in my language, I describe it as robust circulation. So think of it as the metabolism. And most people, when they think about circulation, they think circular economy, no waste, waste is food, close the loop stuff. That's all true in the material domain. but it applies to the information domain as well. And we live in an information age. And so what does the internet do? It allows the robust circulation of information in ways that was previously not even imaginable. And another first principle of regeneration is empowered participation. So, for example, a legitimate democracy is in line with a regenerative process. But the internet also allows empowered participation so that we can all participate in this circulation of information and the creation of new information in ways that, again, were previously unheard of. The problem with the internet is we've allowed extractive reductionist business models, advertising driven algorithms to destroy this fundamental regenerative nature of it. So, switching to AI, um, I'm a student of AI. I'm blown away like the rest of us, but I'm by no means an expert at it. And I do believe, like all technologies, it can and will be used for good purposes and bad purposes. It's not inherently good or bad. Um, the dangers of it are sort of self-explanatory, but one of the idea that I'm very interested in and working with right now myself is that most of the information that AIs will grab from the internet are part of this reductionist modern age paradigm by definition. That's most of what's out there, which is potentially very, very bad because it will exponentially accelerate our optimized reductionist logic because that's
Very good
what
point.
AI
Very
will
good
tell us
point.
to do, right? But there's this living systems, holistic wisdom, holistic understanding, ancient wisdom tradition understanding. So Capital Institute right now is building a bot, an agent that will be fed by Capital Institute's work, and then a curated list of information and wisdom that we select that's aligned with this living systems paradigm. And so if you ask the Capital Institute bot, what do I think about this, that, or the other thing, or what's the best way to do this, you'll get a holistic response. And but this is uncharted territory. The last thing I would say, though, is that one of the challenges of this regenerative economy is we don't actually have the data sets. There are ways to measure regeneration. There's a whole people are interested. There's a paper that colleagues have written with me on this. Ways to measure health, just like you go to the doctor and they take your blood pressure, not because you care about the number of your blood pressure, but because that's a metric of health. So we need to develop metrics of regenerative vitality, but we don't have the data to do the measurement because no one's been capturing the data we actually need. So something like artificial intelligence and blockchain technology has the possibility of massively, expanding and creating the actual data that we need to develop measures of regenerative health, just as one example. So I think we're in uncharted territory. Obviously, the energy demands of this are moving us hard in the wrong direction. I don't have a good answer. It terrifies me, if I'm honest.
Yep.
I wish we could put it off until we have our proverbial shit together, but we can't.
Very good.
Um, Thank you, John. There's a question from Namita. She's asking, as this talk is technical, she wants to know how you see the relationship between the U.S. Federal Reserve, the Treasury, IOU bonds, debt expansion, and loans to the world countries. So, isn't this a pyramid scheme?
Mhm.
Is a question.
So yeah, smart group you got here, Sam. So there's sort of two issues interconnected, like everything in there. Let me start with the debt paradigm of development as it relates to developing economies. Um, the the debt paradigm of development was developed in the wake of World War II, um, and uh, And yet there's no economy in the world I can think of that has developed on debt. They've developed on equity. And so the whole notion that you can, think of a company, you know, when a successful company starts, it generally starts with equity because it has no ability to service debt when it's just getting started. And so the whole debt paradigm forces an extractive development paradigm. And so, the World Bank, with all of its good intentions, is filled with neoclassical economists who see debt as a way to generate growth, and growth is good regardless of the quality of the growth. But what that's forced to developing economies to do is to generate export revenues, which generally can be done by exploiting extractive industries. And what a living system requires is reinvestment. It requires a slower development path where it builds its capacities for it to meet its own needs internally as the foundation of a healthy economy. So to answer the question about the foreign debt, it needs to be restructured and written off in many cases because it's fundamentally in conflict with healthy development. Now, with respect to the US Federal Reserve and the US dollar, that's really an entirely different conversation. The US government has this, remarkable position of being the creator of the dominant world currency. And so, yes, this is a huge conversation, but the yes, there are limits to how much debt the US government can responsibly issue. But in my belief, and this is largely drawing on a group of economists that refer to themselves as modern monetary theorists, MMT. And if you're interested in exploring this, Stephanie Kelton is probably the most prolific, and you'll find plenty of her work online. Stephanie Kelton. Another one is Randall Wray. But what they have pointed out is two important things. One, when you issue a currency, when you are a government that issues its own currency, like the US dollar, and particularly when it's the dominant global currency, you can essentially issue all of it you want. We're never going to default by unless we desire to. We're never going to default on US dollar obligations. That's very different than Argentina defaulting on dollar obligations, which they have too many of. The other thing about the debt paradigm is that we've lent hard currency to developing economies. So we've lent dollars and euros to Argentina rather than Argentina borrowing in its own currency. And that radically changes your ability to repay it. Which doesn't mean we can just print US dollars endlessly without creating inflation and without creating a crisis. But I personally believe the very recent, oh my gosh, we've got too much debt, we need to slash the government spending, blah blah blah, is distorting the real issues. And if I were in charge of the world, I would have the U.S. Federal Reserve financing renewable energy development, probably indirectly through other organizations in the developing world, as fast as possible, because the risk that causes inflation to the U.S. is pretty close to zero, and the urgency to transform our energy system is, I can't think of anything more important. And we're all talking about where's the money going to come from, who's going to take the risk. Well, the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, the Chinese Central Bank, they could print trillions of dollars just as they did in the wake of COVID, just as they did in the wake of the financial crisis, and finance development banks around the world. They could have that done next week if they had the foresight and the legal authority to do it. So I'm much less concerned about the Federal Reserve and US dollar or US debt issues than I am about these other issues. But having said that, we've got chaos in Washington, and everything I just said doesn't mean we can't create mistakes through bad policies that will cause a crisis of confidence in the U.S. dollar, and that I think, and in the U.S. bond market. And that's the risk I'm much more worried about than our ability to keep increasing the amount of debt.
Absolutely. Thanks, John. There is a question from viewer who is asking about tribal areas. I think he's from there. So he's asking, will AI help rural and tribal masses to increase their livelihoods? And also, how do you think the regenerative economy will benefit these areas, like
Mm.
those from the rural areas?
Hmm. Well, so again, super complicated question. I'd make a couple of observations. One, um, when we're talking about indigenous tribal areas, uh, indigenous cultures are the regenerative economy. The, the, I don't pretend to be an expert in indigenous cultures, but for sure, the regenerative economy is a modern Western scientific understanding of what our indigenous cultures have always understood, as we were saying before. So the biggest issue that the quote developed economies can do is get out of the way and let the indigenous cultures be their natural indigenous self, which isn't to say that they're perfect and they're not all the same, but fundamentally they have intuited this forever, as I said. Um, uh, Second point is there is a burgeoning interest in a concept of bioregionalism. And one of my 8 principles, again, my language is honors community and place, which is to say that human culture is unique to place and geological reality on this planet is unique to place. So the economy we need to have, the economy that needs to develop in the Pacific Islands is going to look and feel and be very different than the economy that's going to develop in the Pacific Northwest of North America. And it's going to be rooted in the essence of those places and the intersection of those geological realities and the cultural realities in that place. But because we have set up the world in this reductionist modern age way, we've organized it by nation state and global corporation. And those are artificial holes that are in conflict with living systems principles. So the movement toward decentralization of everything, the movement toward bioregionalism of everything, the movement toward relocalization, including our administration's ill-fated attempt to throw a wrench into the globalization movement. There's actually some truth in that the globalization has run amok. Globalization is not in alignment with how living systems work. There's no such thing as a global forest. There are global systems, but they manifest in a bioregional scale, and they adapt and change to that context. So I think the one of the big shifts that we're now experiencing is a move away from globalization of everything and back toward I prefer bioregionalism to local because there's always a balance between scale and well, let me back up. One of the first principles is balance, and one of the things we've learned from studying living systems is they balance efficiency and resiliency. And they're skewed toward resiliency, but there's a balance between efficiency and resiliency. And so if you want to be in this window of vitality, you need to think about both resiliency and efficiency. So a hyper local economy might be even more resilient, but it's not very efficient. So we need to find that sweet spot between efficiency and resiliency. And of course, neoclassical economics is all about optimizing efficiency. So it's a long answer to your question, but I think this mega trend of moving back toward a bioregional based economy is important, and AI can help us think how to do that. But whether an indigenous tribe living in the Amazon needs AI, I would suggest it wouldn't be
This,
a high priority.
John, this reminds me of traditional wisdom that I mentioned in my book, Redesign the World. Let me take a minute and read paragraph.
Good.
In 1854, the chief of Seattle's Duwamish tribe sent a letter to the US President Franklin Pierce. The letter, in iconic and influential episode in human history, states the following. 1. Earth does not belong to man. Man belongs to earth. All things are connected, like the blood that unites one family. The man did not weave the web of life. He is merely a strand in it. Whatever he does to the web, he does it to himself. The earth is sacred, and man and animals are but one part of it. Treat the earth with respect so that it lasts for centuries to come and a place of wonder and beauty to our children. So I think
Beautiful.
traditional wisdom has been around, and this is a letter to the President of the United States written by a tribal guy.
Mm.
You know,
No, we know this in our DNA. We've just forgotten it.
absolutely,
We've gotten distracted.
absolutely.
Mm.
And for that,
Absolutely.
you don't need a PhD. I remember my own grandfather who couldn't read or write,
Mm-hmm.
but had some great wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
It was amazing, and I think
Amen.
it just passes on from generation to generation. And now that we have PhDs, we think our parents didn't know anything.
Mm-hmm.
You
Although,
know,
Sam, I remember thinking my parents didn't know anything not that long ago.
yeah.
Mhm.
So, great.
Uh,
Go
Thank
ahead,
you, sir.
Prabhada.
Yeah, just before we wind up, where do you see like the concept of regenerative economy, the future of this concept, and also do you have any like a website or like
Yeah, yeah,
YouTube
yeah,
links where we can
Yeah.
because this is a fairly new concept in India, so just to
Yeah.
yeah, thank
So,
you.
Sam and I talked a while ago. We run a course, and we've had a number of Indian students, both young and not young, in the course community. So the first thing I'd say is go to capitalinstitute.org, and you'll find information about the concept as well as the courses. We actually have a new little short book out, an hour. We call it an hour book. It's a book you can read in an hour. It's not available outside the US yet, but the website for that, and you can put your name on the interest list, and we'll figure out how to deliver to India and other places soon. But it's ourbooks with an s.com. And it's called Regenerative Economics, and it's the essence of regenerative economics in a short little book. And the book is not available. You can't buy it on Amazon. It's a gift economy idea. So you can buy 10 and give 9 to your friends, but you can't just buy one off the
And
website.
can you get a digital copy?
Not yet. We're
So
talking
that's the
about
best
that,
thing to
but
do.
yeah, no, we'll do that. It's literally just out, so we don't have that available yet. The most important thing, though, is to, if you can, join our course community, because you'll find 2,000 like-minded searchers to collaborate with. And I always say in the course, the community is the curriculum. And the next regenerative economics course will be in the fall. But if you go to With Life, what is it? Withlife.org. I'm confused. It's either withlife.org or .com. That is the course platform, and we offer. I do that with a partner organization called In Rhythm, and we offer now 8 or 9 different course offerings: leadership, organizational design, but it's also just a community of conversations like this that are all free. And we'd love you to join that community. and you'll then get on our mailing list for information and sort of. But this is a lifelong journey that we're embarking on. It's not there's no one course that's going to teach you all this. But what I can say is that the energy in that course community is what keeps me. It's what keeps me going, and so I really would welcome anyone who's intrigued with this to sign up, and maybe Sam, I'll get you the links that you can circulate
Yeah.
afterwards in
You
case
and I
it's
had
confusing.
you and I had a conversation once, right? For your
Yeah,
course.
Sam's in the
Mhm.
Sam's one of our thought leaders.
Yeah.
I do a number of dialogues, what I call discovery dialogues with wise people and thoughtful people, and so Sam and I had a dialogue that is now
I remember
recorded
that.
and part of the curriculum in the economics course. That would be my suggestion, and I can't remember if I answered the full part of your question.
So I just wanted to know what the future of
Oh, the future, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So I'll leave you with maybe one example of how this transformation is happening already. You know, if you think about a farmer's market, that's a regenerative economy.
Mm.
But if you think about there's a network of businesses in the Basque Country in Spain that are owned as cooperatives, and it's called the Mondragon Cooperative. The Mondragon cooperatives have been around since, I don't know, roughly 1950. They emerged out of the Spanish Civil War chaos. So again, good things emerge out of chaos. And there was a small ion of coherence there that triggered the creation of the Mondragon cooperatives. Most people go study Mondragon and they say, oh, cooperative ownership and governance is the key. And cooperative ownership and governance is an interesting idea that might be applicable in certain contexts. But if you really study the Mondragon cooperative enterprise, and by the way, this is something like 80 businesses, an internal university, an internal bank, total sales of 20 billion euros a year. This is not some little pilot project. Been around for 75 years. Um, if you study that and you understand living systems principles and the regenerative economy, you'll say, oh, that's the regenerative economy, because they manage this 80 companies as a single ecosystem. They don't optimize for profits of individual companies. They manage for the health of the whole. So it is literally a business enterprise that operates like a healthy, mature rainforest. And if company A has to lay off people, they have a commitment to create jobs in company B so that no one,
Mm.
people have security once they're inside this cooperative. They also invest their own money to join this cooperative, so they have skin in the game. It's a profound example, and people have tried to replicate it, but it's unique to the essence of the Basque community, honoring community place. I'm not sure you can ever replicate it the way it exists in the Basque country. So even when people ask me for examples, I'm always hesitant to say, "Oh, go look at this," because our natural tendency then is to go do it somewhere else.
Mm.
When in reality, what we need to replicate are the first principles. So I'll close with, every snowflake looks like a snowflake. Sorry, every snowflake is unique. So
Mm.
Mondragon is unique, but every snowflake looks like a snowflake. So what needs to manifest in India is going to be different than what manifested in the Basque Country. But
Mm.
what's going to be the same are the living system patterns and principles. That's the whole premise of this work. So our job is to use our own creativity, understand the unique essence of each place in each context, and build and create something new that addresses that specific context. But just like an airplane can't be in violation of the law of gravity, it needs to be
Mm.
aligned with these principles that describe how life works.
Great.
Absolutely brilliant, John. Thank you both, and we wish you'll be our guest in the near future again with the interesting concept. And
Thanks, John.
thank you.
Really appreciate your taking time.
My pleasure. It's great to
And
be
I'm
with you
sure we
all.
have a lot more to talk.
Absolutely.
And
Thanks for
I'm
your
sure
good
you
work.
have now
Thanks,
at
everyone.
least 100 more admirers.
Well, join our community. That's where it all happens. I'm just one cog in the machine, as they say.
Thank you. But
Be
I
well,
think you have
everyone.
raised some very interesting